Right, guys, we're looking here at habitat studies today. Continuing on from yesterday, where we looked at ecosystems. So, you might remember that ecology is the study of ecosystems. Okay, and really, what is an ecosystem? Well, an ecosystem is all of the different interactions between the different organisms in that physical environment. Okay, um, so our goals today are to try to understand ecology a little bit better, to be able to explain common terms that are used in the field of ecology, like habitat, ecosystem, communities of different organisms, and to basically talk about how you would undertake a habitat study. Okay, we mightn't get necessarily that far, but we'll see how we get on here. So, when we talk about ecology, what does it mean? Well, ecology is a branch of science, a branch of biology specifically, which deals with ecosystems. Okay. The question is, why do we study it? Well, in I suppose across the world right now, we are studying it because we're trying to figure out if populations are declining or increasing, if species are going extinct, to get an idea of the damage we are doing to the world. But ecology is much more than that as well. Ecology is the basis of a lot of different sciences where we study different organisms, we look at their unique properties, and we try to make those organisms useful for us sometimes in ways, for example, for the fields of medicine or other types of research. Um, so in Ireland, what does ecology look like? Ecology is used for purposes, for example, for looking at the quality of river water. Okay, so to make sure that we have safe drinking water, we can look at the species that are present in the water and see, is actually the water favoring organisms that would live in, I suppose, healthy rivers. And um, an awful lot of the time, what we notice is that the biodiversity, which is the variety of living things, it tends to be much higher in healthy environments. Okay, in forests in Ireland as well, we do ecology. We might do ecology to try and see is there disease. Okay, so we don't want our trees, for example, to die due to different diseases that might be brought in from abroad. So it's important that we have an idea of maybe the spread of disease around the country as well. And there's obviously other uses as well. I suppose another thing there, which is a big thing for farmers, is the spread of something called TB. TB is a disease that affects humans, of course, and it can be spread to humans from animals. So, an animal that has been, I suppose, constantly persecuted for TB is the badger in Ireland, and that badgers, we need to know where the badgers are, if they're diseased, and then try to deal with that if that is a problem. So, in relation to our knowledge, what do we know about these different words here? Well, I suppose I've talked about ecology now. The habitat. So, what is a habitat? A habitat is basically a place where an organism lives, okay? And it's basically the specific location where they live. So, for example, if I was talking about a woodlouse might live, we'll say, in dead bark, okay? That might be the habitat of a woodlouse. You could talk about a worm. A worm specifically lives in the soil. Okay, you could talk about grass. Grass tends to, I suppose, be located in open grasslands. Okay, it doesn't do well within woodlands. Um, and if you're talking about deer, deer are I suppose, an organism or animal that tend to live in woodlands. Okay, they don't tend to like living out in open, I suppose, open plains. All of these organisms are adapted for their particular ecosystem. Okay, we looked at adaptations already. So, adaptations, for example, if we talk about green flies, why are they green? Because that gives them camouflage for the grass. If you're talking about, badgers, a behavioral adaptation of a badger is that it is a nocturnal animal, and that means it comes out at night to basically um, I suppose, hunt, and it avoids other organisms that it might be in competition with then during the day. There's a few other things there, of course, and we'll be looking at this now shortly. Right. So, in relation to ecology, as we said, it is the study of ecosystems, or you could say it's a study of the relationships between organisms and their environment. So, the relationships that we talked about yesterday, you mentioned a number of these as well, food chains. So we know, for example, that grass is a producer. It uses photosynthesis. It is eaten by rabbits, and then rabbits can then be eaten by foxes, and that's a food chain. Okay, we know that in the world around us, food chains, of course, are what drives the world. Um, so we ourselves are tend to be omnivorous. We eat plants and animals, and somewhere along that food chain, we find ourselves having eaten different types of food. Um, Competition exists here between different animals in the environment. We think sometimes about competition between humans, but really, in the animal kingdom, it could be a physical competition for things like a mate. It could be competition for food resources. Okay, it could be competition between chicks in a nest for food, for example. Um, that's a big factor for organisms to survive. And parasitism, then as well, which is basically where disease causing organisms may enter the body. And these parasites, something could be like lungworms in a deer, it could be like, for example, ringworm in, I suppose, a badger. All of these are parasites that can harm animals, okay? And obviously, there's ticks as well. So in Ireland, we have ticks as well, and you have to be careful about that. So the study of ecology, why do we study it? Well, I talked about that a little bit earlier, and the one I want to talk about there on the right there is the badgers again, and there's a big argument: should we vaccinate the badgers so they can stop the spread of this TB? TB is an awful disease here that can be spread to humans, and we cannot allow it into the food chain. So if cows get TB, they have to be put down, and they're not, I suppose, consumed then for meat, and their milk cannot be used. So, the kind of questions we might ask inside ecology about these things is like, who eats what? So how did the badger get the TB in the first place? How is the TB spreading? And I suppose another thing to bear in mind is, could we use any of these organisms out there, like a badger, to try to develop new medicines? We know that, for example, ignoring badgers a second, 40% of today's medicines were originally from plant extracts. Okay, and that's a huge percentage there. So obviously, you need someone to study that, to basically tell us what's out there, so that it can be further researched. Um, there's other things, of course, to study. The other reasons to study ecosystems, for example, what's the importance of protect the environment? Well, a lot of the time, people, they enjoy going to, I suppose, outdoor areas, and it would be a shame for it to be destroyed. So it has an aesthetic, I suppose, value. We call that an intrinsic value that people respect. And it's a shame as well when we see pollution happening here, because pollution often can lead to human disease. So pollution, for example, if cows get into open waters, then that is a problem. And again, that links into ecology, because the ecologists will be tracking the quality of the river water. Right. So moving on, um, in relation to ecology, it's I suppose something that comes up an awful lot more in the media. We hear an awful lot of biodiversity loss in the media, and I suppose we're living in a very different world today, where every generation feels like, this is the new normal, but they don't realize what was there in the past. And unfortunately, things were much better in the past in terms of biodiversity. So, what kind of words do ecologists use? They use the word, like, for example, a habitat. A habitat is a place an organism lives, okay? And as I said there, we talked about this earlier in terms of worms living in soil. You could talk about, well, robins tend to like hedgerows, okay? And you could talk about the red squirrels. Red squirrels, especially the ones that came in from Scotland, they like conifer trees. That is their habitat when they're in Ireland. An awful lot of the red squirrels in Ireland actually were originally from Scotland. The language of ecologists, what else have we got? An ecosystem. So the ecosystem is a bigger thing than a habitat. So the habitat is found in the ecosystem. So in terms of an ecosystem here, we could be talking about a river. Okay, the River Liffey could be an ecosystem. So that would be fresh water, running fresh water. And if within that ecosystem, then the actual The base of the river, the soil or the rock at the base of that river could be a place where an organism lives. Okay, so that could be, for example, some sort of shrimp. The tidal zone would be again an ecosystem, but within that tidal zone, you might have, for example, little pools of water, and that would again be a specific habitat. Right, so the ecosystem again is just a bigger thing, as we said. So you start with habitats, and you come up to grasslands or up to ecosystems. And an ecosystem, again, as we said, is the organisms, how they interact in that environment. So you're talking about all the different things like competition, parasitism, food chains, etc. Right, so what's the difference between a population or a community? Well, a population is the number of a particular species in an area. So you could be talking about the numbers of otters, we'll say, for example, in the River Liffey. Okay, you could be talking about the number of killer whales in the Atlantic Ocean, or maybe you're talking about the number of people gathering on Paddy's Day. Okay, all of those are populations. And the difference between that then and the community is basically all of the different species in the particular area. So you could be talking about, for example, in a great savanna, you could be talking about antelope and elephants and wildebeest and the different numbers of species. That would be a community in an area. So the community is basically the number of species living in a specific habitat. Right. So I am going to put up all these questions here, and I'm going to ask you to answer all of these questions based on what we've covered today.